Hello and welcome to a new episode of Ilanomics. There was a advertising line in the papers today which said, in one of the papers, which said anything can happen in 2022. So please read us to find out what this anything is. We will not go into such vague territory and say anything can happen in 2022 because anything can happen in any time of the year or month or day in 21, 20, 19, 23. We will focus today on a few specific things on what the Indian economy can expect. Today is the last day of 2021 and what a year it has been, and you've been with us through the year. We've come to you almost every Friday without fail. But now is the time to look ahead and take lessons from what happened this year. Hi, Ila. We'll touch on a couple of specific things you have written about today in your column, and we were talking about looking ahead, and by the time we discussed about it and the time we're doing the show, so much has happened on the pandemic front again. So that's the first issue we will tackle. How do you think the economy can deal with this new wave? People are calling it a wave already. It's, I don't know, we can try and figure out whether it's wave or not wave, but the cases are going up. It's bad. So how does the economy deal with that?
I think the first question would be whether this leads to a lot of hospitalization and deaths. If it is mild, and though it is spreading very, very fast, but if because of our vaccinations, because of earlier spreads, because of the nature of Omicron, if the number of people who fall really, really ill and who have to be hospitalized and those who die is less, and if it spreads really fast, then the one thing we can hope for is that it will go away soon. In a few weeks, maybe it will spread like rapid fire, but then it will go away soon. So in terms of the economy, of course, the next few weeks will be... I'm really discussing almost like a best case scenario, almost. That it, even if it spreads, it doesn't hurt us too much. Yeah. We won't be able to stop it from spreading because
that's the nature of the virus.
That's the nature of the virus. So while of course we should do social distancing and try to reduce the speed at which it spreads, but it's going to be very hard, especially this mutation.
Yeah.
So in that scenario, I think the next few weeks might turn difficult for those sort of businesses where people are very close. So gyms, restaurants, weddings,
the contact services
could face difficulties, but we hope that will be short-lived and that it will go away soon, and then in 6 weeks' time. So, like if you look at South Africa, it took about 6 weeks to go away. So in about 6 weeks' time, we are back to normal, but then we are a much bigger country, so the spread might take longer. There will be, I think, some restrictions in place, hopefully not as many as we saw earlier. Also, hopefully the impact will be less because of vaccines and earlier spread, and our ability to cope. We've also learned how to cope. There's remote working, there's work from home. So hopefully the economy will not see as much of an impact. Like we saw that the second wave, the economy did not have as much of a negative impact as did the first wave. So hopefully now we'll see less of an impact on the economy. I mean, it's unfortunate that it's there and that there'll be some impact and we'll all get hurt, but hopefully not too much.
But January is pretty much a write-off.
I mean, that's what it looks like, right. That if it's going to take 6 weeks, then Jan and Feb are going to be difficult months.
And then macroeconomic policies is the next item on your list. And in a sense, one of the big events in the macroeconomic policy calendar is the budget, which sort of falls bang in the middle of the next 4 to 6 weeks. Do you see that influencing budget making in any way?
Look, there's very little scope for fiscal policy expansion. And if we do want to have an expansion, then what I would like to see personally is a reduction in the GST rate. Because there are two ways of doing fiscal expansion. One of the ways that has been adopted by most advanced economies is direct transfers to households. Okay, here we've done some transfers to households, but then the systems are not in place to do a lot of transfers. So you remember the migrant crisis, and then the almost inability to identify migrants when the crisis was there, to identify them or to push money into their accounts. Even when that is done, the proportion of people who are within that organized system is low. So here, instead of the first option, which is fiscal expansion through direct transfers, even though there's very limited scope for fiscal expansion, but if it is there, then what I would like to see is for the center and states to come together and say, look, we have a crisis, can we agree to get the GST rate down to 12%? Because you also have now managed to get a lot of the economy into the GST fold. Collections have improved, and so let people who are bearing the burden of paying GST, as well as businesses, many businesses who got hurt because the rate was so high that they didn't have those kind of profit margins to be able to, pay 18%. I would like to see that come down. So it's not a big fiscal expansion to the tune of 10% of GDP. It's not printing notes, as many economists have suggested, but it will help both businesses and households to survive another year of, so every disruption causes an impact that doesn't go away the day the disruption ends. It takes a while for that impact to go away. So to help them, I would like to see a cut in GST.
We are talking on a day, Ila, when the GST Council is meeting. The state finance ministers are here in Delhi, and they are talking to the Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. Cutting is not on the agenda, although they have postponed the implementation of the increase in textile rates. It was increased from 5 to 12, but there was a demand from the industry that 5 to 12 is not a reasonable increase, at least not right now, like
Not
you said.
now.
But obviously the GST cut, if there is a cut, will not happen in the budget. It has to be a consensus between the states and the center. But fiscal room, governments are hungry for revenues and bolstering their kitty, and there is nothing else right now. There's no room to do anything with direct taxes either. So GST, do you think it's a reasonable demand to be able to cut it?
See, at the moment, if you want to give a push to the economy and you don't want another wave of COVID to hurt the economy as it has been hurting, and you really don't also have the ability to do direct transfers to households who might get hurt, that is very specific giving effectively income support to very specific households who are getting hurt. We don't really have that ability. So we have one kind of program scheme or another kind of scheme which are for specific households. Then the way to give the whole economy a push is a tax cut, and a tax cut of this kind which can be reduced. So I would say, given the choices that we have, if the decision is to give a fiscal push, do fiscal expansion in the context of the budget, I would not like to see a large spending increase based on borrowing. I would prefer to see, which effectively has the same, it's the same. You see a cut in taxes, because that everybody benefits, and that, of course, then you would have to still borrow to cover that deficit.
The timing of the budget and whatever announcements that might happen during January and February We all know there are very crucial political events later in the first quarter, which is assembly elections in 5 states, and that ends up influencing economics. But do you? I mean, obviously nobody likes SOPs to be given away, but do you think the governments can resist doing that?
See, it is the nature of governments to try to balance it is in the nature of every political party, when in government, to try to balance the objectives of growth and redistribution, and particularly before an election. So, before an election, the tilt towards redistribution increases compared to the focus on growth, which usually happens, midway or a little before an election. Now, we are a country which is always in election mode. So, I think that, whether it is a critical election in UP or whether it was, right after the 2019 election, you had
a bunch of other elections.
See, so because we are always in election mode, I think this balance is a very tightrope walk for any political party. So let's see what sort of measures are announced. But I would not be surprised to see the balance turn away from growth towards redistribution.
Or fiscal irresponsibility.
So I have not seen fiscal irresponsibility happen from throughout from 2014 onwards. Even when I was in government, I did not see Mr. Jaitley was the finance minister. This instinct was fiscal prudence. The instinct was not to go and spend more. Even at the time of COVID, when the Atmanirbhar package was the first wave, and the package was announced, it was, let's do reforms, let's get productivity improvements by doing reforms, not that let's go out and spend more. Let's, in fact, save our ammunition. Who knows, we may need more later down the line. So I'm not saying that I expect fiscal irresponsibility. I just think that if there were a lot of things that could have been done for pushing growth forward, an election might slow it down, but then they can come back on the, I mean, they've been there on the agenda, and they can come back after the election.
You, in your column, talk about the need for avoiding knee-jerk responses or reactions. Excuse me. And we were also discussing before we got onto this conversation about the stomach for reform, and politics always influences how much reform a government or a political establishment is willing to do. And after what happened with the farm laws, our colleague Shubham Batra broke a story earlier this week that the privatization of 2 public sector banks has been sort of put on pause because the government does not want to risk the anger of bank unions in the run-up to assembly elections. That's a reasonable political calculation, but economically it's a bit of a dampener. And that's the title of your column today, Keep Calm and Continue Reform.
Yes, so I think if it does get pushed, and if Shubham is right, because it's there at least on the agenda, it can be picked up after the elections. I've lived through decades when the word privatization, bank privatization, was kind of, swept away. Banned, hidden away. Used to say disinvestment, very as if it means something else. And that too, not to talk about banks at all. So it was with, great hope that one saw it at least come back on the agenda. And I think like Air India, where today nobody is going nuts about the Air India being privatized. Yeah. That slowly leaving things on the agenda, discussing them, is also a big step forward. When it gets done, of course, I'd rather see it done sooner rather than later. But for those of us who are observing what policymakers do, at least it's not been put off the agenda. So one can remain optimistic, one can remain hopeful that it will get done, and that the government at least has the courage to say that they would like to do it. In contrast to governments which would say that, we don't even talk about privatization.
So we'll go to the reforms you've talked about before we take questions. Ila, this is Ila's column published in the print today. We will give you the link to the column in the notes of the show, and also give you a link of Shubham Batra's piece on bank privatization. You talk about legislative amendments to facilitate the two PSBs, which we have discussed. Resolution authority, public debt management, bond market reforms. These are all, things that have been in the pipeline for a while but not happened. Do you think 2022, at least some of these things will get moving or should get moving? Should get, of course.
Yeah. So I'm optimistic because these things have not been taken off the agenda. As our need for infrastructure increases, as banks become less and less capable of satisfying that need, as the need for a bond market that is able to pull in capital, pull in long-term capital into infrastructure, as long as that need is there, and there's no very big political opposition to it. After all, yes, the RBI doesn't want to give up turf, but we've had earlier governors who were very vocal in opposing PDMA and FRDI, and particularly PDMA, not so much FRDI. FRDI, it was more of the details and the clauses, such as if the supervisory capacity which was being given to FRDI. But that's also not there anymore. So I'm optimistic that this will happen, and I hope it will happen in 2022. The country does need these.
Okay. We've got questions, Ila, and for viewers who don't know, we are also on Facebook today along with YouTube. So we have questions and viewers on both platforms, which is the reason we have two mics today. The first one is from Mohit Sharma. There are many predictions that we will see a double-digit growth this year. Is this due to low base effect and we will again enter a slowdown like before the pandemic?
I think, of course, it's due to the low base. That goes without saying. If you calculate growth, it is Y2 minus Y1 upon Y1. So you will have higher growth because of the low base. But as I was saying earlier, I'm hoping we will not enter a phase of slowdown, that we'll be able to get over this phase without too much damage to lives or to livelihoods, and that it will be short and it will go away soon. And we discussed some of the reasons of why one hopes so, not that it's just a prayer, but that it is because we've had more vaccinations, we've gotten, many people had COVID, so there is immunity there. People are getting it a second time and a third time, but it is not as bad as the first time was. So hopefully the economy will not be hit so badly.
Just to add to that, and we were looking at this newspaper column which said high growth, high risk. High growth, high inflation. How do you deal with high growth and high inflation simultaneously?
See, the high inflation that is happening is because we've had excessively loose monetary and fiscal policy for now more than a year and a half.
18 months,
Yeah, a year and a half, so about 18 months. And you do need to get a normalization of monetary policy, not just in India, but across the world. And fiscal policy in places like the US is pushing prices or demand, consumer demand up, and pushing prices up, commodity prices going up, in addition to the logistics problem. So on the demand side, you have one issue, and that is that you have expansionary demand, both from fiscal and monetary policy. And on the supply side, you have logistics and supply constraints and various things that are not being able to function. Put these two together, you've got inflation. And I think the answer out of this inflation lies in as the supply constraints ease, as well as getting policies back to normal. So a bit of normalization of monetary policy, no further fiscal expansion, as well as getting supply functioning. And that actually gives you high growth and lower inflation. So that would be the way to deal with it.
Harsh Saxena is a question from YouTube. Just when we thought that the NPA cycle had ended, the RBI recently warned us about that NPA level will touch 10% again. From where is this coming from, and what could be the implications?
I think the economy has, and many sectors of the economy have been in difficulty through this period. So this is not entirely surprising. And hopefully the way out is not to give more taxpayer money to public sector banks, but to actually allow, either privatization as well as new banks. They could also think about allowing more foreign banks so that you get a credit expansion. You allow more branches. I mean, the WTO says 12, and we say, we give you 20 a year, but we can allow more branches. We can allow expansion of those and try to get credit growth back up without putting taxpayer money into banks.
My question again, curiosity, do foreign banks have the appetite to invest in India, because Citibank decided to pull out of India this year?
Yes, it did, but for many years they have been applying for more branch licenses and we haven't been giving them. Almost all foreign banks for many years have been wanting to apply, been wanting more branches, and we've been denying their requests. So what do? I would expect any businessman would move out if you don't allow them to have more branches. So you need to create the regulatory framework and system so that they can expand. They'll be interested in being here if you allow them expansion, not if you say you can't have more branches, as well as the priority sector lending requirements. I mean, how many foreign banks actually have the ability to lend to farmers? So there was the system of credit, NABARD bonds, but the RBI looks down on that. On not actually lending to farmers, not lending in tier 2, tier 3 cities. So it doesn't work if you don't allow them branches, but you say you have to lend.
Garvit, another question from YouTube. Do you see any big bang reforms by this government in the remainder of its 2.5 years, especially in the aftermath of LARR 2015 and farmers rollback?
See, I think Air India is a big reform. For Air India is just one. There's next LIC. There are a lot of public sector enterprises that are on the list for privatization. And if this government is able to go through with that in the remaining 2.5 years, these are reforms that have been talked about since 2004 actually, and haven't been done. So if they get done in these 2.5 years, I would think that's a big achievement.
Manik Kapoor is a question from Facebook. Hello Manik, welcome to watching us on Facebook.
Sorry.
Exporters require some devaluation of the INR, as Indian products have lost their competitive edge on prices. It's just a statement. So do you agree, disagree with that statement? He's not asking a question. He's saying exporters want the INR to be devalued.
Exporters are always happy with the weaker rupee. Always. Any currency, exporters are happy because it makes the currency more competitive. Now, the question, it makes their products more competitive. Now, the question really is, should it be a policy to devalue, or should it be that let the market determine the rate and we don't interfere? And if there is devaluation, particularly now, think if monetary policy, if the Fed starts tightening and there is depreciation, would you want the RBI to step in the way it did in 2013 at the time of the taper tantrum, or would you let the RBI go and RBI steps back and allows the depreciation to happen, giving exporters an advantage? So really, realistically, those are our two options.
Pratik, WI, another question from Facebook. Is it necessary for India to expand fiscal policy as it has already done with monetary policy, as the IMF report mentioned?
So, that's where what I was saying in terms of fiscal expansion is that don't think of fiscal expansion as just pushing government expenditure. Same fiscal expansion, the same effect can be achieved by cutting taxes. And if the economy is weak and needs a push, and we have saved up a bit of our ammunition on fiscal, though there has been of course there's a larger deficit, but I think that the one thing we could consider doing is cut back on taxes a little.
Hitesh Swaroop, another question from YouTube. Is there a possibility of recession in 2022 as Elon Musk has predicted?
So, see, at the moment, it doesn't look like we'll see a recession because we have a low base and growth is going to pick up if Omicron doesn't hurt us too much. If Omicron hurts us too much, we might see a deep recession. I don't know about Elon Musk, but my work on business cycles, which I've been doing for 30 years, is not predicting a recession, but maybe he started working on business cycles and it does, I don't know.
Or he knows something we don't.
Or he knows something that we don't know.
Last question, Ila, Surya Vasu. Are tax collection rates and quantums going up solely due to inflation, or there are other factors involved?
I think there are other factors. So, two big factors. The first is GST, and things come into the GST fold. It usually takes 5-6 years. There's a period of transition when more and more businesses start coming into the GST fold. The other is, of course, the much larger use of digital transactions during the pandemic. And in that, what we see is that this combination gets people to start being like, okay, I'll get my GST credit, I'll pay through a bank transfer, and all that then gives you higher tax collections.
Higher tax collections and hopefully strong, resilient, stable macroeconomic stability is what we can hope for and expect and realize in 2022. I'd like to thank all our viewers who watched us and stuck with us throughout 2021. We are really grateful to you for being with us on Ilanomics and taking memberships. And those of you who have not taken membership, do your good deed for 21, or you can even do it as a good deed for the new year and take subscriptions and memberships of our YouTube community. We will be back in the new year and we will keep doing what we are known for and bringing to you insights. Until then, stay safe, take care. There is a new variant out there, and wish you and all your families a very, very happy and safe and healthy 2022.